That's not mine. Welcome to the new layout. Hopefully this is going to go well. And with a new layout, I thought I'd start a new series. This is the Foxverse in 5. I'll be going through all of the X-Men movies and Fantastic Four, and I'll be ranking them up as before. In future, there will be a poster up there, and I think that's my brother's. My wife stuck it up there for me to find, which I have done, of course, the moment I started filming. Anyhow, all that aside, let's get into it. And the first one for this is X-Men 1, released in 2000 and directed by Bryan Singer. Had a production value of 75 million, a worldwide total of 296 million, for a total profit of 221 million, which was quite astounding at the time, because honestly, not even Fox thought that this was going to work. Starring Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Hugh Jackman, Halle Berry, Famke Janssen, James Marsden, and Rebecca Romijn. Many people will say that this is where the whole comic book movie fad or craze began. And in many ways they are right. However, I do believe Blade was the first one that took itself seriously anyway. But it is fair to say that X-Men 1 is where it really began to gain momentum. Now, having watched through all the MCU as it is now, gone through the DC stuff, watching this film, I've got to say, it's probably one of the darkest openings and some of the most dour and oppressive themes. The whole presentation of all the oppression and the hatred, and the intense hatred, actually, politically motivated hatred as well, that is presented in this film is some of the darkest stuff I think I've seen in this genre. And if I remember correctly, that is a common theme through all the X-Men movies. But it just felt very, very stark in comparison to the comic book movies you get at the moment. I'd also like to say it actually felt like one of the comics from the 90s. This movie felt like me reading one of the, I'd say, mid-90s X-Men comics. Grand science and grand schemes and people appearing dramatically in snowstorms, and they're just chucking code words out, like it makes sense. The only person who finds it funny is Wolverine, but then again, he has Wolverine on a tag around his neck. So, they really embraced, it really felt extremely comic-y. And this, I think, personally, is probably my favorite X-Men movie of the whole lot, just because they jumped in and they just seemed to get it so right from the very start. The CGI, not fantastic. Some of the dialogue occasionally, pretty average. Exposition, a little heavy-handed, but also you got to remember that this is the first entry point for many non-comic fans to the superhero universe, as particularly mutants. So you gotta go a little hard, right? You gotta be able to throw it out there to make sure it all sticks. Make sure that the viewers kind of get what they're doing. Okay, Gengar's sending me nuts. He's just sitting right in my vision there. I'm gonna have to, you can sit down there, buddy, okay? Alright. And I'd like to quickly touch on some of the characters. Now, of course, Ian McKellen, Patrick Stewart, they do an amazing job as Magneto and Xavier. They're just perfect in those roles, aren't they? And they're going to have such a hard time recasting them as mutants enter the MCU. Heck, they had a hard time recasting them in their own alternate timeline series within the same franchise. It gets really complicated later on. Marsden captured, I personally believe, Scott Summers perfectly. That's the Scott I knew from the animated series and the comic books and everything else. That's Scott Summers. He's also about as charismatic as a shoebox, which is a side problem. Also, perfect Mystique. That was a great Mystique. That's a perfect on-screen Mystique. Storm looked the part. Unfortunately, her power set was right down here. In the animated series to some degree, but particularly the comics, she doesn't need most of the X-Men half the time. In that movie, that scenario, she could have dealt with all of them on her own, no trouble. They had to, of course, dial that back in this, because otherwise, it's going to be not much of a team movie, is it really? Speaking of underpowered, Rogue, really quite useless. Very much a damsel in distress, which is terrible for Rogue, because she is nobody's damsel and never in distress. Then the other end of the scale, Toad's a threat. They made Toad into an actual threat in this film. Shocked, delighted. There we go, two words for that, shocked and delighted. Toad being useful. That's a new one, But overall, the story is very X-Men. The look was also very X-Men. Even though they didn't have the yellow spandex suits, they at least referenced it and kind of made fun of it, which it kind of deserves. But still, everything matched everything else. Everything felt like a comic book. So this is a very strong benchmark and middle position to judge everything against. And I'm going to come out and say that I think it's going to be a harsh judge of the others. Anyhow, there we go. Thanks for joining me for this one. Hope you've had a good and safe start to the new year. And as always, have a great week, make some time to watch a movie, and I'll catch you later.